Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast. I'm your host, Byron Greeley, and today's guest is Sarah Weller, the CEO of OpenFormat. OpenFormat is aiming to shift the power dynamics and enable creators and builders to make a sustainable income by leveraging game economies, blockchain, and AI. Now, this is a big problem and an admirable one, and we go into the details of how the company first started, why they're tackling this problem, what they hope to achieve by tackling this problem, and all the little details. We also discuss things like being a learner and how to spot learners when hiring and building out your company, taking calculated risks, and the ideal work environment that Sarah would like to create at OpenFormat. It's a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Sarah's great, and I know you'll find her great too. Enjoy the show. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for joining me today. If the short call we had in prep for this conversation is anything to go by, I'm really excited about this conversation. So to kick us off, before we get into the weeds of everything, can you tell us a bit about your company, OpenFormat, and what it is and how it works?
Yeah, of course. So OpenFormat, we are creating the open format for digital economies. So what we're doing is we're bringing together game economies, blockchain-based technologies, and AI to really rethink how creators and builders are able to make a sustainable income for what they create and what they build and what they put out into the world. And we fundamentally believe that the power dynamics that exist today, when it comes to kind of monolithic tech companies and how many people are at the mercy of them in terms of kind of revenue, like actual revenue, as well as just general power and decision making. And so we want to do something about it and believe that the technology exists today to enable us to create some pretty big shifts in how we see digital economies, and to the benefit of many builders, many creators. So we're building a tech stack which will have things like revenue splitting at point of transaction. We're looking at micropayments and kind of how we bring together all the different costings in one transaction. We're helping people build decentralized applications really simply with token-based systems around them. And we're helping people manage their economies through an AI assistant, which we're starting to create at the moment. So that's quite a long-winded way of talking about it, but it's a new way of thinking about digital economies, and I'm very excited to be a part of
Awesome.
it.
I don't think that was long-winded at all. It seems like you guys are tackling a really big problem, and it's really, really interesting. So why this type of company? Like, what led you here?
Great question. The truth of it is the humans that I sit around the table with are why I'm here. So there are 5 co-founders, which is a lot, and which is quite unusual. And one of my co-founders is a guy called Mark, and I worked with Mark early on in my career. So I'd just done a corporate job and I've hated it, to be completely honest. I stayed 3 years and I learned a lot, and I'm really grateful for a lot of the things that it taught me, but I'm not supposed to be in corporate environments. And I met Mark, and I left this corporate environment to go work in a startup which had 3 other people, all engineers. And Mark was the co-founder of that business. And he totally changed my view on what work could be and the kind of work that I wanted to be a part of. And he was running a tech business at the time. And anyway, I then kind of went on in my career, and I did digital agency work, and a number of other things. I always stayed in digital and tech and did a number of consulting roles. And then Mark and I bumped into each other again. I was really interested in Web3 technologies, more so looking at it from a community angle. And I thought, I know who I need to speak to about this. And so I got back in touch with Mark, and we spent some time together, and he was telling me about some things that he'd been creating at his previous business, Simple Web. some of the experiments that they'd been doing and what they'd been proving and what they were able to figure out. So this is really interesting. And then Mark and I were both in Egypt together, if you can believe this. I'd just been on a women's retreat. It was no joke. I'd just been on a women's retreat in Egypt. And after the women's retreat, I was going on a cruise in the Nile. And I spoke to Mark about it. And I was like, why don't you come to the cruise part? There's loads of people going. It's going to be absolutely incredible. And I won't go into all the detail. I mean, it was amazing. That's for a different time. But there was a morning when Mark and I were sat actually at the base of the pyramids, talking about these different experiments, talking about blockchain-based technologies, talking about what we believed and the wrongs that we wanted to right. And Mark was like, why don't we do this? We have a chance. The technology exists to create change. If people like us who have the skills that we have and the energy and the care and the enthusiasm and all of those things, like, let's do this. And I was like, yeah, I'm in. And we came back and there was not a cell in my body that doubted this was the right thing to do. And then Andy, who's actually in my kitchen right now, working on our new website, which I'm very excited about. Andy, who had been kind of inventing, he's very much an alchemist, and he'd been working with Mark on doing all these experiments. He was part of it. Bruce, who is our CTO, he was one of the founding engineers at WhatsApp. The absolutely incredible technologist, strategist, human. He's just a wonderful person. He came, and then Dave Allen, who was the co-founder of What If, which is where I was a director, and it got bought by Accenture. Dave was like, what is she up to? And I introduced him to Mark, and the five of us came together at Dave's house, and we spent 2 days together in November 2022 talking about what we cared about in the world. What do we care about? What matters? And what mattered to all of us was, how do we redistribute wealth? How do we rethink value exchanges? How do we rethink how revenue is being split at the moment, and where those power dynamics exist, and where it's really not fair in terms of the people contributing and creating and building? And that's what we talked about for 2 days. And we all walked away from those 2 days and thought, right, we're going to build a company and it's going to tackle some of this, and we're going to take on some really big problems. But we know what we want to do, and we think we have a chance. And I feel very privileged to sit at the table that I sit at with these other 4 humans.
That's amazing. What a great story. And like you mentioned, it is unique to have 5 co-founders, but it seems from the story you just told that each one of you is necessary and a part of like the bigger picture to tackle this huge problem.
100%. And we have such different skills. So you've got Mark, who's very much a visionary alchemist. He has incredible ideas, and he thinks very differently to anyone I've ever worked with. Bruce, who is this kind of unbelievable technologist and who thinks in scales, like, he was part of the founding team of WhatsApp. So the way that he thinks in scale is unlike anything. And he's so kind of steady and calm and very thoughtful and meticulous in how he's thinking about systems. Andy, who's like I said, the alchemist, he's like, how he obsesses about problem, and he's like, well, how do I solve this? And he'll like go down and he'll just come up with something and not realize what he's done and how incredible it is. And then you got Dave, who, I mean, What If? He's been part of building incredible businesses, and he's very much commercially focused. How do we tell our story? How do we think about how this shows up in the world, and how do we make sure that we get there? And then myself, from a business perspective, I think my role is, what are the stepping stones to get us to where we want to get to? Like, how do we make sure that we survive to get to the end point whilst utilizing what we already have? Because it's quite, when you're building quite towards quite a big vision with tech, with engineers and technologists, sometimes I'll speak to Andy and I know he won't mind me saying this because he knows this is true. He wants to build stuff that's all the way over here. And I'm like, Andy, that's probably like 6-8 years away. We need to be working with people on stuff that's here. I know, and as far as he's concerned, this is yesterday's news. I'm like, it's not. We've already got this technology. We need to find our stepping stones. So I think that's kind of my role is keeping us moving and kind of focused in on the stepping stones and the pathway to get us to our big vision. I think that's kind of my role.
Awesome. And where did your sort of passion or belief in blockchain and Web3 come from?
I think it came. I'm a very curious person, and I actually think. Well, I know that it started from a philosophical point for me. I'm not an engineer. I've worked in technology and digital for a long time now. But I was reading about this is years ago now, but I was reading about DAOs and just kind of trying to get my head around decentralized structures. And I was reading about just stories of how the future could be based on new types of networks and new types of models. And then hearing more, the more I kind of read that, and the more my curiosity was just like, hang on a minute, there's technology exists now where we could do things in different ways, where we could create these new types of value exchanges, where we could create new types of organizations, new types of networks, new types of structures, kind of rethink entire value chains and kind of how, where intermediaries sit or don't, and kind of where the value is being added and therefore how the economics model works around that. And I've always been interested in business models, and I was really fascinated by the idea of what some of this could do from a business model of the future perspective. Like, what could this mean in terms of the actors in a system and where you could exchange value? And I think there was, my curiosity really took me in that angle as someone who, like I said at the beginning, has been very against the power dynamics. I feel very strongly about the imbalances that I see today, very strongly. And so when I already had that fire energy, and then I could see, and I was really curious about what was becoming possible in my mind. Like, people who, engineers and some people, like, they've been all over this for way longer than me, but it kind of came into my sphere and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And then speaking to Mark, like I said, and he was talking to me about all sorts of experiments and stories and how he saw the future of music and how he saw the future of, money and how he saw the future of so many different things. And I was like, yeah, this is really cool. This is the kind of thing that I would put all of my time and energy and heart into, because I really believe in what could be possible. And I really believe that actually there's been a lot of bad actors using new technologies for just shit, to be honest. And there's it's very commonly talked about in blockchain, but this kind of the casino side of it. And again, that was like I'd kind of got this curiosity, but then I could also see how new technology was being used for bad, to put it very simply. And it's just like, no, like, if we now have the tools and we can bring these things together to do something great and create something worthwhile, we need people to step into the space who are actually going to do that with the kind of intent that I think matters. So it kind of fueled even more reason when I was speaking to Mark. I was like, well, actually, there's like a responsibility. To be honest with you, I think I felt a responsibility when I could see all of this in front of me. I could see the opportunity, but I could also see what was being done, and the problems to be solved. And it's like, no, someone has to do something about this. Why not me? Why not? Why don't I get stuck in and just throw myself into it and see what's possible?
Yeah. I think many early adopters share similar views to you and are just as passionate. But there's the other side of the coin, or like people from the outside looking in, that kind of paint or associate the word blockchain with like everyone involved in blockchain, and there's like a negative association with it sometimes. Like you mentioned, there's a casino type projects. And so how do you guys sort of combat or battle that sort of general opinion? Because I mean, like, you're working on a very important project, but I'm sure some people from the outside looking in see blockchain and sort of write it off instantly. So like, how do you work against that?
Yeah, really good question. I think we're very open about our principles and what we believe. So we kind of, on our website, on our Substack, on everything, here are our principles, and they are about inclusivity. They're about optimism. They're about the things that we've already talked about, kind of redistribution of wealth, rethinking value exchanges. So we try and be very upfront about the underlying beliefs and mission that we're on and why. And then from an audience perspective, one of the things that we talk about quite a lot internally is some people won't want to pick up our toolkit yet because they only see the negative as opposed to the positive. And right now, it's not our job to prove to everybody the other side of it. We just want to build tools so that enough people come and build utility, and that there are ripples from that. If we try and convince everybody right now, we'll run out of energy and time and we'll die. What we can do is put opinions out, and I think we need to do a better job of that. And I'm very aware of that. We can put opinions out about the kind of utility and the kind of pathways to what we think could be very beneficial in terms of these new business models, in terms of these new value exchanges. We can lead a way. We can shine a light on what's possible. We can tell stories of possible futures. And we can also work with the people today who don't need convincing, because that's our quickest route. And then we can show real things, real tangible things that are making a difference. So we're working on a project right now, which is about humanitarian aid. And I'm speaking to another company right now, which is about migrant workers and what happens to, and like the level of exploitation, to be completely honest, that exists around the world when it comes to migrant workers and roles. There's like a number of projects that we're working on, people that we're speaking to, where the proof has to be in the pudding. We have to be like, this is what has been enabled. This is how it was, and this is how it can be, and this is how it happens. Because otherwise, I think it's just a lot of hot air. So we need to get to utility. We need to get to like actually adding value, and we need to work with people who are already there, because I think that's our quickest route, while still putting out opinions and stories that make people curious.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting dynamic, because there are a few projects like yours that are solving real problems and focusing on utility, but at the same time, you're battling against actors internally, like within the blockchain ecosystem, and externally at the same time, because the meme coins and things like that don't give you don't give you a good rep, and you're associated with them, but at the same time, you're definitely not. And so you almost want everyone within the blockchain ecosystem to work together to show the use cases and get people to adopt the new technology. So it's like you're being combated from two sides, which is a very interesting dynamic that I don't think many like new technologies have.
No, it's a really interesting observation. I think about this quite a lot. I think like on a when I'm having a dark day, I'm like, could I just not be doing something a bit easier? Like on one of my dark days, it's like it's hard enough. Starting a business. It's hard enough building products, putting them out there into the world. It's hard enough when it's kind of newer technologies, as far as the world is concerned, not as
Yeah.
far as some people are concerned. But then to have these kind of polarizing views and a kind of such a massive uh, hill to climb reputationally as well. There's a number of things, but to be honest, I think that's why it's even more important. Um, it's why it's even more important to just keep keep going and be the people who try and create ripples that are counter to what's out there. Because it'd be very easy not to.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd like to rewind the clock a bit and ask you about your experience working for other people and what that was like.
Yeah. How long we got? My experience working for other people. Yeah, I've been very privileged. I think I have had I'm really proud of my career. I'm really proud of where I've made decisions to move as well. And I think that it's been so I started out my career, I worked for General Electric, which for younger people, I mean, when I left university, General Electric was the biggest company in the world. Like it was who at business school, I studied them. And the idea to go and work for GE was like, oh, wow, I'm going to go work for GE. And I'd studied them and I kind of done case studies and all this sort of stuff. And, they would process improvement and lean Six Sigma and like ways of working was really well documented and shared in business schools. Um, and I'm really grateful for some of the foundations. I think you've got in the big corporate roles. I think one of the things they do, especially for business students out of business school, I think you get a really good grounding in foundations. Like you learn sales, you learn account management, you learn about clients generally, you learn about processes, you learn about workflows, you learn all of these different things, and you have the best kit to help you with it. GE, we had an amazing CRM. This is years ago, and I was like trained and trained and trained, and there's a lot of great things, a lot of great foundations that I learned from working for a business like that. That being said, whilst I'm grateful for some of the foundations and some of the things I learned, it was awful. Actually, I was bullied. It was, in hindsight, I think that those sorts of organizations, you're expected to stay in a box. And if you have opinions outside of that box, or if you kind of are quite a curious person in the way that I am, it doesn't go down well. And I've seen that in other corporate organizations that I have since been a part of. And so I had a rough ride. And again, I think because I was out of university, I didn't really know any different. And I was like, is this just how it is? And it really confused me. And it took me a really long time to get over actually how I was treated. And I think, and honestly, I've always been a very hard worker. I have very strong work ethics. I work hard. I care about my work. And so to be kind of like battered down, I couldn't really understand it. I was really confused. But as I say, I think some of these bigger organizations, the people, my thought, and it's not a hypothesis, I've been in enough of them. My belief actually is sometimes, not all the time, you've got these amazing people who sit at the top of these organizations, super smart, incredible strategists. And then you've got these hungry graduates and all these people kind of doing loads of work. But some of the middle management that you get should not be in leadership positions at all. They should not be responsible for managing people. And I strongly believe that a number of these large organizations don't take the management of people seriously enough, especially back then, especially, what was this like? Yeah, 2007, 2006, 2007, that sort of time frame. I think they just, if you were good at a function and you've been there for long enough, you became a people manager. That's
Yeah.
bullshit. The idea that because you have been working in risk for 10 years or because you're really good at X, you should now be responsible for 10 people and their learning and development is just nonsense. And I've been on the receiving end of that a few times. The other thing that I would say about it, though, is I was working for GE Capital, so finance, during the financial crash. And that was an unbelievable learning experience, actually. So again, and you got to see kind of really interesting dynamics. And, I'll never forget, I was on stage presenting to quite a lot of people. And people had those massive Blackberries at the time, right? So this is going back. And there were people in the audience, and they just got an email from GE to say that we had cut, we were stopping financing, which was, pretty normal based on the financial crash and everything that happened at the time. I was on stage, and I didn't know that was about to happen, and I was doing a presentation. And like those memories of kind of that whole situation and what happened, and a lot of my colleagues got made redundant, and it was a very weird time. But again, I feel it's light and shade. It's like the duality of all these things, right? I had horrible experiences. I had a lot of learnings, and through the horrible experiences, I have learned about where my own lines are, and I have continued to do that. I've gone on to work for different companies. I've been through a number of acquisitions, which is always interesting. I have many stories about kind of when you go through acquisition and that kind of culture change and change in like big changes in culture and dynamics and priorities and what that does. And then on the flip side, I worked for What If Innovation before it got acquired by Accenture. I was still there after the acquisition, actually. So this is fast forward massively now, because I'm just conscious I'm like rabbiting on. But What If was, the culture of What If was like nothing I'd experienced. It was absolutely incredible. Just beautiful humans who all cared deeply. And I'll never forget being a part of that business and just how much I loved it. And I felt like I'd found my home. I just loved it there so much. But again, as these things change and acquisitions change things, and I've had a lot of great learning experiences, and I really now know the kind of culture that I want to be a part of and where my lines are and the kind of cultures that I definitely do not. So I don't know if I've even answered your question then, but lots of experiences, lots of learnings. But through all the painful experiences, as with everything, I've grown, I think, as a leader in myself, the kind of leader that I want to be, but also the kind of environment that I will be in and won't be in.
Yeah, well, you definitely answered the question. And I'm curious, did you know you always wanted to start your own thing eventually, or did your experience of like some tough work environments coupled with your experience at What If sort of motivated you to do that, or is it sort of a combination of everything?
Great question. When I was at uni, it wasn't a thing to start your own business. Like some of the people at OpenFormat now, they're like 24, 25, and it's such a part of their conversation, like to be, to start your own business, to do your own thing. In today's world, it's like really normal. When I left uni, it was not something that I knew much about, certainly from my own friendship circles or my family dynamics. Like, my dad was like forces, it just wasn't what I knew. And I never really thought about it. It was like, oh, well, I'm going to, do my degree and go to business school and then go to one of these big companies. That's basically what I thought I had to do. I had to go to Accenture, or I had to go to KPMG, or I had to go to General Electric, or like, these are my choices. It was Mark that changed my view. Mark, who I work with now, he massively changed my view, because when I decided I was going to leave GE, I wanted the opposite. I was like, what is the opposite of this? Because I don't want this. And so I found that job on Gumtree, which is so funny now. And working for him opened my eyes to small teams, to what you can accomplish, like 3 people, 4 people. And also to the fact that when I worked for Mark, I had like 20 different jobs. I was project management, I was sales, I was marketing, I was like everything. And that suits me. I'm actually much better in that environment than I am just sit in this box and stay in this box. It doesn't work. If you're a curious person, it doesn't work. You're like, but why are you doing that over there? How does that make sense in relation to this? So I think, to answer your question, I didn't always know. And actually, after I was part of a company, a digital agency that got acquired. And after the acquisition, I ended up running that agency. And I will never forget when I decided to leave that post acquisition. I stayed for a while after acquisition, and then I was completely burnt out. I was completely burnt out. And I remember speaking to the recruiter, and I just said, I can't run anything for a while. I know I will again, but there will be a time when I create my own business and I will run it. But right now I can't. I need to not be responsible. It's actually what I remember saying. And that's when I went to What If. And What If built me back up again. And I say this to Dave, and I've said it to Matt as well, Matt Kingdon, so David Matt, who created What If. What If brought me back to life from a career perspective. It rebuilt me. It gave me back my confidence. It gave me back my energy and drive and desire to be a part of something and to want to create something and to be really proud of whatever it was that I was creating and the people that I was choosing to work alongside. And so I knew, even before I went to What If, I knew there would come a time when I would run something and be a part of a startup or co-run something, like not me, like I would be a part of a startup and we would be doing something. And What If gave me that back again. It gave me my fuel to then think about what that would be.
That's so interesting. I think people forget how much of an impact a work environment can have on you. I mean, you spend so much of your life there, and particularly bigger institutions don't really think of it as much as, or notice it as much as a smaller work environment, because you're quite a tight-knit group. But I'm curious, at OpenFormat, you're obviously conscious about this kind of thing and thinking about it. So how do you go about building a work environment that you're proud of?
Great question. Yeah, it's tough. It's not easy, especially when you've got as much to do like, as we do. And it's interesting. You've got, on the one hand, like I actually said on one of our calls yesterday, there's been a lot of work done this week. It's been a great week, actually. I've absolutely loved this week, but there's been a lot that's been done. And I said yesterday on one of our calls, I was like, I know I've been posting in Basecamp quite late. And there's no like expectations about anyone replying at any time, just to kind of like reiterate that people work whenever they want to work at OpenFormat. And that's true. Dan, who I work very closely with, he's a night owl. So
Yeah.
that you're not getting him on a call. Oh, you know Dan anyway, don't
Yeah.
you? You're not getting Dan on a call before 11. Not a chance. And he'll post stuff at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, why? We figured out the other day, he was still up and I was getting up to walk my dog. And I was just like, you might as well live in Australia. So there's like flexibility in working. And then in terms of kind of broader culture, like we've got our office in Bristol, which I think is I actually think face-to-face time around some of the things that we're doing is really important. Not all the time, but enough face-to-face when you're trying to do what we're trying to do is really, I find it really important. Like being able to come together and have key conversations, I think is essential. And I really don't think some of what we're trying to do is really hard to do virtually. So culturally, there's like, when do we need to come together? When do we not? And then I think at this stage, all we can do is lead by example. Like what do we think is acceptable and not acceptable? How do we want to treat people and be treated? How, how do we listen? How do we show up? How do you say when you're wrong? Like I said to Dan last night, we were going through something and I was like, Dan, I think I'm about 10% of a person right now. I'm so tired. This is so shit. And I'm trying really hard, but I think I might as well just give up. And he just laughed at me. And it's like, but I think that's really important. It's kind of honesty, humility, openness, transparency. Like these are the principles of our business. The inclusivity, the transparency, all of these things. This is the kind of business that we want to create. And so we are also those as people. And we have to remember that, and how we show up and how we hold ourselves true to it and how we go, and sometimes we all mess up, we'll have a bad day. But being like, I'm really sorry, I was a bit of a idiot yesterday. And this is the reasons why. And I'm just sorry about that. I think that's really important. But I'm a very open book anyway. So Ollie was here this morning, who's doing a lot of design work with us. And he was just, he looked at one of the decks that I created and he was like, I think I want to use the word overshare. I was like, that sounds like me in all parts of my life, Ollie. As maybe you're figuring out. Yeah, I don't know if it answers your question. I think I'm just thinking it through really, but I think you have to, all you can do at this stage, we're a small team. All we can do is be who we are, like be truly who we are, lead by example, and like be and not accept things that are outside of our lines. Like if something happens and you don't agree with it, you've got to stand up for it. You've got to say something, because otherwise these things creep in.
Yeah.
And that's not cool.
And when building out your team, what kind of people are you sort of looking for?
Learners.
And how do you spot that? Like, how do you find a learner?
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting, actually, and it's a really good question. I think and it's really hard to spot, especially kind of in interviews and like those sorts of things. And we're not quite at that stage yet, but we will be soon. But I think I've had this before at What If, at X agencies. The thing that I would say, skills, especially in today's world with how quickly things are changing. How do you spot if someone's a learner? I think the ability to say that they don't know is really important. So it's a massive red flag for me if someone is kind of gets defensive about something. That's a huge flag. It's like none of us know everything. I know, like sometimes I'll go into calls with a technologist and I'm like, I understand about 10% of this conversation. I'm not going to pretend anything otherwise, because that's not what I'm there to do. And actually, I think it's very dangerous. And I've been in environments where people, they think they have to know, and so they pretend that they know what's going on. That brings a lot of danger and a lot of risk into businesses. Whereas I think learners, like being like, I don't know, I don't know the answer to this, but I want to go and figure it out. Or it's not my role to, but I trust the other people around me. Kind of openness to collaborate. So, which I think you can test, like how does someone respond if you counter an idea that they have, or if you talk about a different angle or a different way of approaching it, even just to provoke a response. Is it a collaborative, oh yeah, actually I can see why maybe we could do this, and have you thought about doing it this way, or maybe we could think about this, or I hadn't thought about that, or maybe that could connect to this, and as opposed to, well no, it wouldn't, well that wouldn't work, or well no, but I wouldn't do it that way, or but why would that? And I, even as I'm saying it, I'm recalling conversations I've had with people many, many times where I can see both of those things playing out and things in between. But I think I'm quite tuned in now to how that kind of curiosity shows up. There was a lot of those sorts of people at What If, and we have them at Open Format. I think the people that I'm very fortunate to work with now, I think all of us, that's the thing that hold us together, is the curiosity and the learner mindset. Like a lot of what we're doing, we're having to figure out. Like some of the stuff that Bruce and Andy and George, some of the stuff that they talk about and they're working through at the moment is just like mind blowing. And so they're literally like trying to research and figure things out, but they're all such learners. And I think that's what you have to be. That to me is the most important thing. That kind of learner curiosity, learner mindset, curiosity.
Yeah, I agree. And what has been the hardest part of the open format journey so far?
Oh, I think the thing, and I don't know if this is the hardest part of the whole journey, but it's the thing that's like really forefront right now. So I'll share it. It's like, it's a big vision. I've never worked on something before, which I think could be the next decade of my life if I'm lucky, if I'm really lucky. And B, some of the things that we're talking about today, for them to take years to be in reality. It's quite challenging to get your head around. I was going to use a lot of swear words then. I had to really stop myself.
You can wear swear words if you can use swear words.
It's quite challenging to get your head around. And so keeping one foot in today whilst keeping one foot into the big vision, you have to straddle this, and you have to do that very regularly, because you're thinking about the bigger picture, and you're thinking about how do we tell that story, and how do we think about the components, and how do we think about how we're building what we're building and for a future state. But you also need to stay grounded in today, and what is it that we already have that people can use today and that can add value without all these other things that we're trying to create and build, which could take a while to come to real life. I think that's the thing that I find the hardest is straddling today and continuing the momentum of today, whilst also not losing sight of this big picture and why we're doing it, knowing that that's going to take a while to get to. And I don't think I've done a very good job actually of that, especially recently. I think it's something that I'm really aware of right now. I need to get much better at, is making sure that we really, yes, we need to keep thinking about this, and we need to keep evolving it and keep evolving our view of it, and getting clearer on what some of that could be, even though a lot of it is so much R&D still. But the kind of driving today, and really grounding in what we can do today. Yeah, I think that's the thing that I find difficult, if that makes sense. And that's the thing that I really need to work on at the moment, because I think I need to get better at that.
Yeah, that does make sense. But I think it's a very common problem that many entrepreneurs face. And many successful entrepreneurs attribute their success to thinking long term and having the patience to get there, because many people start out and then just don't have the patience and think in decades. So yeah, the fact that you're conscious of it obviously shows that OpenFormat is building something really, really exciting.
It is. I am. Yeah, I
And
don't doubt it.
and what's your view on risk? Would you say you've taken some risks throughout your career?
It was like it's really interesting actually, because a lot of my friends, a lot of my closest friends, would say that I'm quite a big risk taker personally. I I've handed my notice in without having another job a number of times, because quite frankly, when I'm in something, I don't have time to look for another job. I go all in on anything and everything I do. Like, this is very much a part of me as a person and my makeup. So I get to a point where I know I need to be out, and so I just hand my notice in, and I'm like, well, I'm out. And it hasn't happened it hasn't happened loads of times. I think I've been quite steady in what I've done, but I've known when I've got to a point when I don't enjoy what I'm doing, or I just feel like I'm exhausted beyond repair, eject, out, get me out, and then I just go. And some people have said to me, weren't you scared? It's like, what did you think was going to happen? Or, why have you just done that? And even kind of after the What If Accenture acquisition, I had some of my friends, they were like, are you mad? Like, this is such a great opportunity. I was like, this isn't for me. No diss. Like, for some people, it would be a dream, actually. And probably 15 years ago, it would have been a dream. But it's not anymore. So I'm out. So now I have to figure something else out to do. And I think my frame of reference has always been, what's the actual worst that could happen? What's the worst that could happen? Okay, if I can't pay my mortgage, what happens to my house? Well, if I have to sell my house, but I'm still going to have a roof over my head. My parents have got a shepherd's hut in their garden. So am I actually, like, how bad is it going to get, really? And I think I've allowed myself to go there quite a few times, to just be like, well, I don't think it's that bad. And I'm very privileged to have that, unbelievably privileged. And I don't take that for granted at all. So I think I'm just like, well, how, for me, because of my privilege, I'm like, well, it's not that bad. Like, worst case scenario, I'm in a shepherd's hut in my parents' garden with my dog. I mean, it's not that bad. It gets pretty cold in winter. But also in my kind of joke generally as a person, like, I've done some pretty mad stuff. Like, I went on a sailing trip down the coast of Tanzania with two of my closest friends, and I'd never sailed before. But I was like, well, why not? This seems like an amazing adventure, and this sounds fantastic. Let's go. I take risks. I definitely do take risks for myself. But when it comes to business, and I think very differently about risk. So, like, right now, I'm like, right, what geographical locations have what regulation? And Bruce is like brilliant at this, and Bruce and I speak about this a lot. It's like, where does it make sense for us to be based on the existing regulation, because we want to work with that, and we don't want to take any risks, and we're not like trying to think through all of the details from a business perspective. So I think there's a very big difference, which is very logical in my mind, between my personal appetite for risk, where I can be a bit, what's worse is going to happen, let's go, versus business risk, where I'm much more like, but hang on a minute, what if this happens, or what if this happens, or what if this happens, and we have to like scenario plan to the nth degree. Yeah,
that makes sense. And you mentioned the shepherd hut in your parents' garden. I know in our previous call, is that the shepherd's hut that you spent 3 months in?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, why did you spend 3 months in the shepherd's hut?
Yeah, I did actually this year. I've had a bit of a shit show of a year personally, to be completely honest with you, and at the start of the year, my dad was very unwell, and so I moved back in with my parents to look after my dad. So I actually left my home, and I didn't realize it would end up being 3 months. Um, but I needed to look after my parents, and so I was still working and still doing everything open format, obviously, but whilst also trying to take care of my dad and also my mum. Um, so that was a difficult. It's been a difficult time, and I think I said to you before, like I would like literally get up. And again, this is huge privilege. I'm just saying it because it's quite funny. I'd get up in the morning and literally have to put the fire on because it was so fucking cold. Like it was like -4, and I'm like in this shepherd's hut, and I've got a call starting, and I've got to get my dog out. My dog who's like passed out over there is Bowie. I was like, fuck my life on some days, but it's family matter, like perspective.
Yeah.
Some things are more important, and sometimes it's more important to do what you've got to do personally. And I've like that this year. I've had a lot of personal work. Like this whole it's just been a bit. I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it. I've spoken to a few people who've had a really rough year this year, actually. And I'm definitely one of them, where I feel like I'm just like this. You can't quite get a grip. It's like another wave sideswipes you, and another wave. And mine have been all personal this year, whereas work, I friggin' love open format, and I love what we're doing, and I love what we're creating. Thank God.
But
But I've had a lot of personal sideswipes this year, and being in a shepherd's hut for 3 months when my dad, with my dad, has been one of them.
yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm sure the rest of the year and next year will be better.
I hope.
And what is the long-term goal for open format?
Uh,
It's a big question.
wealth redistribution, and I want to be a part of something that genuinely redistributes wealth. And one of the things that we're creating is what's called a social conscience layer, which is part of our stack. And our goal is to real-time stream money to good causes around the world because of people using our technology. And Mark always says, he's like, I want to stream $1 billion. That's what I want to do. Then we know we're winning. If we're streaming $1 billion, then that's great, and to good causes. But this is what we're talking about. Like this is so much bigger than any of us as people, and this isn't about we're not trying to build a business to for personal gain. This is about how do we create an open source new type of network? How do we enable builders, like developers, creators, to have a sustainable income and to be rewarded fairly for their contribution and their value creation? These are some of the things that I can't wait until we're having conversations with someone who's like, oh, do you know what? I've just contributed all of these templates to this SaaS platform, and now that's my career, and I'm making this much money every single month because they've got open format working in the background, which enables me to have revenue splits, and it enables a whole new peer-to-peer network where I'm being rewarded for all of my contributions. Boom. I was like, that's why we exist. Oh, and by the way, every time that you're paying money to open format, part of that is being redistributed anyway. So it's all of it is about redistribution. All of it is about that disruption that I believe we can create, positive disruption, to some of these value chains and some of the business models that exist today. And eventually the benefit will be enormous for end users and how users consume content, information, experiences, all of those digital points of engagement. There will be so much benefit to end users, but as I said already, we've got a number of stepping stones to do before we get there. But yeah, our goals are massive. We want to be a part of wealth redistribution, and we want to create this open source protocol and network that we don't own. There's really interesting ways that we're thinking about structure, really interesting ways that we're thinking about our pathway to decentralization as an organization, which is really hard. It's hard. And we're lucky enough that we get to learn from people who have been doing this already, when some of their challenges and the things that they've learned, we get to learn from that, which is incredible and like really fortunate for us. But yeah, I'm excited for our pathway to that as part of our vision, as well as actually how much we can redistribute, as well as the actual impact that these new sorts of digital economies can have on the livelihoods of a lot of people.
Yeah, that is really, really exciting. I'm looking forward to following the open format journey. Before I end every conversation, I ask my guests if they have a question for me.
Fantastic. Question for you. I would say, from everyone that you've interviewed, I'd love to know some of the common threads that you find between like different industries, because you interview quite a lot of people. So people who are running businesses, different entrepreneurs that you speak to, what are some of the most interesting common threads about do you find that people have quite common experiences when it comes to working for other people? Do people find that people have quite common thoughts on what fuels them? Do people have quite common, what are the commonalities between the different people that you interview in your seat? Even if they might work in completely different sectors, different areas, different roles.
Yeah, well, the one you mentioned is one of the more obvious ones, is like the frustration with working for other people, liking to they enjoy doing so many different tasks like yourself. And so when you are put in a box, it's just really frustrating. You want to do more. You want to understand how that connects to other pieces within the business, but you're not really given the freedom to, particularly when you're starting at like an entry-level position at a larger company. They're not going to give you the free rein to jump on a call with like the CEO and have a conversation, ask them questions and things like that. But at the same time, what I find really interesting is it's very common. Everyone has like a fire lit under their ass, but they frame it in a way that's unique to them. Like someone's fire might, from the outside looking in, might not seem like a fire, but the way they frame it, like one thing that's said to someone in a meeting room that automatically becomes a chip on their shoulder, and they're like, I'm going to prove you wrong. And that person who wrote you off or said you'll never do that in a joking way, they just thought it was a joke and all found a joke, and they move on with their day, and no one else in that meeting room realized that put that chip on your shoulder and you're going to prove them wrong. And that was a fire that caused you to start this huge business. And others were literally backed into a corner financially. They had no other choice, and so they had to make it work. But there's a whole spectrum, but it's the story that these entrepreneurs have told themselves, and it's that self-story that firstly they believe in themselves to get it done, and secondly they make the story, either it literally is really big and serious, or sometimes it isn't, but they make it big and serious because they need that sort of motivation to get it done. And I find that a common trait amongst most successful entrepreneurs is they've started because they created this story that motivates them and keeps them going.
Love that. Can I ask you another question, or is it just one?
Sure, go for it.
What do you want to do with the podcast? So I could see online, so you've interviewed a number of people now. What's your plan for your podcast?
So I started with like very small incremental steps. Firstly, because I know committing to something long term, you've got to keep motivated. You got to set shorter term goals, or else it's going to just fizzle out. And so I learned that I think it's like 90% of podcasts don't make it past the third episode, and 90% of those don't make it past 21 episodes. So my first goal was, okay, I'm going to make 21 episodes and I'll be in the top 1% of podcasts. Like, that's something I can control. Doesn't matter how many people are listening to it. I'm just going to hit 21. Then I hit 21 and I was like, okay, I'm going to go for a year and aim for 52. Just to sort of get in the flow of things, make sure I have a constant flow of guests, how I go about that. And so the first year was just figuring that out, making sure I was in the flow and just comfortable speaking with people. And now this second year, it would be a bit silly to sort of have the same approach, because I feel like I've now got that. I've got 52 episodes under my belt. I need to have some new goals. And now the new goals are growth. So it's getting more listeners, improving the way I edit the short form videos, as discoverability on Spotify is pretty poor. So you've got to look to other social platforms. And that's my focus this year, is to get more listeners. So possibly the podcast could be monetized. But that obviously just means it's attractive to advertisers, which means listeners, that's worth their money. So that's the goal this year. And we'll see how it goes.
Great. Good for you. I think that's really cool.
Thanks.
Discipline. I totally agree with you as well. You know, that kind of consistency and discipline is so easy to say, and yeah, it's one of the first hurdles for so many people. It's so important. And so that really resonates. Thank you.
No worries. But with the also setting those smaller goals and not being so hard on yourself if you decide you don't want to do it, because it's okay if you think that you want to start podcasting, you start it, and you like, I think I told myself, if I commit to 21 episodes, get to the top 1%, and I don't like it, I'm okay with stopping at that point, because I know I've actually given it a proper go. And so that's my approach to most things. It's like, give it a proper go, and then it's okay once you get to that point, that goal that you set, to decide that it's okay to stop. But yeah, I think a lot of people are in the middle, and they're a bit too hard on themselves sometimes, or they just don't really give it a go at the beginning. And so, yeah, that's just my approach. But thank you so much for joining me today, Sarah. I really enjoyed our conversation. If people want to find out more about you and OpenFormat, where can they do so?
Openformat.tech. We will actually have a new website live by Tuesday, which I'm very excited about. Or I'm on LinkedIn, Sarah Weller, or YouTube, OpenFormat_tech. Yeah, they're some of our best places.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Chat soon.
Thanks so much. Great chatting to you.
Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.